Get started. I know I've said that before, but okay. All right. Hello. We're going to get started. Great to see so many faces. Oops, there's another one. Saba, you handling? Thank you. Great to see so many faces. Thank you for your interest in our special event. My name is Uta Brady. I am the postdoc at Syracuse University. I'm also the lab manager at the Institutional Grammar Research Initiative, which we also call Igri. And Igri obviously is hosting today's event, so welcome. We have 5 speakers today, which will be presenting an overview of their research center or program's mission, important advancements in institutional theory and analysis that they are pursuing, and how that work supports and or furthers the research agenda of Elinor and Vincent Ostrom. And finally, they'll also be talking about potential opportunities to collaborate or get involved with the research that they're pursuing if you're interested in doing so. But in many ways, this presentation is intended to be a reflection on the extraordinary scholarly legacy and contributions of both Elinor and Vincent Ostrom, who sadly are no longer with us. In order to give you some context on the Ostroms, what they were passionate about, and the key components of their research agenda, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Edella Schlager. Dr. Schlager was a graduate student of the Ostroms, and she's kind enough to share her knowledge and experience working with them and provide us with a background upon which the subsequent presentations and research is built. So Edella, please take the floor.
Thank you, Uta, and welcome to everyone. It's really great to see all of you and to have such wonderful turnout. And as Uta said, first of all, I'm going to share my screen because I have a few slides that will guide my presentation. I'm just going to spend a few minutes touching on the high points of the Ostrom's research programs, the important features and dimensions of those programs before then turning it over to the speakers. I think that it's impossible to think about the Ostrom's work without thinking of the word workshop. And Scott is going to talk more about this, but what I really wanted to emphasize is how critical this concept of workshop was to both Vincent and Lynn and the research programs that they developed in the context of a workshop. And so a workshop, it's a noun, but it means either a place where people engage in intensive discussion and activity, or it's a group of people who engage in intensive discussion and activity. And in the case of the Ostroms, it was both. It was a place and a group. And what was remarkable about their creation of a workshop was that, first of all, it was global. There were scholars and visiting scholars and students from around the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and that we all worked together on a shared set of puzzles. Graduate students were considered apprentices, and that we could learn with more seasoned scholars on engaging in the critical questions of the Ostrom Workshop. And this comes through in their work quite a bit. Lynn regularly, when speaking of major concepts or research, would often say, well, me and my colleagues did this, or me and my colleagues did that. There was always this notion of collegiality in her work. And so the questions that they asked were just too big and too important to be held with just 2 people. And they developed this workshop, this group of people to engage in a particular activity or subject. The work that took place in the workshop centered around this concept of warrantability. And I admit it's not used that often, but this was a term that Vincent often used and made reference to. And warrantability is to make a claim that something And in the case of the Ostroms, constitution or contract or covenant or institutional arrangement is sound and will perform as expected. And if you take a look at Vincent's book, The Intellectual Crisis in American Public Administration, or even The Theory of a Compound Republic, you will see this notion, or he refers to this concept of warrantability regularly, often. That didn't make sense, but often. And what he used it for in The Intellectual Crisis in American Public Administration is that it was the foundational critique that he made of the discipline of public administration, and arguing that the claims that were made, and you can think of all of the classic concepts in public administration, such as, span of control or expertise, that these were normative claims that weren't grounded in experience, and that they lacked warrantability. So his argument was that what we need to do is to see what is the actual situation on the ground, what is the logic of that situation, can we understand the shortcomings, and then propose alternatives. And so everybody who worked in the workshop, there's this notion of warrantability, that we're working on developing claims that are sound and will perform as expected. Or that we can systematically analyze situations and understand their limitations, why a governing arrangement doesn't work as expected or as well as expected. But really the glue that held the research programs together was the concept of self-governance. And that's both, foundational to Vincent's work and to Lynn's work, whether with Vincent looking at the constitutional order of societies, or whether it was Lynn's work around the provision of public goods and services in urban settings, or the governance of common pool resources. The research program centered on this concept of self-governance. And it was a significant puzzle that drove the work of Lynn and Vincent. And Vincent captures the puzzle really well in his book, The Theory of a Compound Republic, because there's this fundamental tension within self-governance, and that is that no one is fit to govern. So how can you create constitutions and governing arrangements if no person is fit to govern? So that's how he would start out his seminar. Lynn, on the other hand, focused on self-governance, but centered around collective action dilemmas. And how do people engage in cooperation in order to resolve shared problems and provide shared benefits. But the tensions are in some ways between the two research programs are the same, is that you can't just simply assume that self-governance is going to emerge automatically or naturally, or that it's going to work well in practice. So how is self-governance addressed? And how do we understand what it means to make claims whose warrantability can be assessed? And so there's also a particular orientation to developing claims about how governance is structured and the logic of governing arrangements. And that is a problem-solving orientation. So it wasn't that we, the group that makes up the workshop, that we have the answers and we tell people this is how you solve your problems, but rather we have a problem-solving orientation in which it's critical to initially understand the issues and challenges that people are facing in specific contexts and how those contexts shape and condition those problems. And we come to understand and explore the warrantability of our claims using multiple methods. And that is clear in one of the, I think it was 95 or 96 Rules, Games, and Common Pool of Resources, published by Lynn and her co-authors, in which there's game theory, lab experiments, and case studies all brought to bear on collective action dilemmas. Or the more recent book on working together, where Marco is one of the co-authors on that, and additional methods are brought to bear. So that's the orientation of how do you go about addressing self-governance through the Ostroms research programs. And then I think for a number of you, what that immediately calls to mind is the IAD framework. And at the core of the IAD framework are action arenas where the context is set up through the action situations. And you can't forget that there are different levels of action situations, and action situations are linked. And that actors are assumed to generally be norm-following, fallible learners, and that they're attempting in these interacting situations, they're attempting to solve problems. So in a nutshell, if it's possible to put Lynn and Vincent's work in a nutshell, I would say that those broadly are the concepts and dimensions that shape the work of Lynn and Vincent. If you're interested in learning more and seeing them and hearing them talk about their own work, Barbara Ellen, who's a student of theirs at Carleton College, she developed a film called Actual World, Possible Future. And I have the website listed there where you can go and watch it. It's really very good, but I would refer you to the title. That title captures the research programs of the Ostroms of making warrantable claims about the actual world. And in doing that, in assessing the actual world, envisioning possible futures where self-governance is more fully realized. So that's the context for the rest of the speakers that we have in store. And Scott is the first speaker. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Edella. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thanks to Saba and Syracuse for setting this up. Oud, thank you for setting up this wonderful webinar as well. Edella, I wish we could just listen to you for the next hour, quite honestly, because that was brilliant. But that would, of course, shortchange all the other excellent speakers. But I will try to make this as brief as I can so that we don't do that. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. Excellent. Okay. I titled it Reintroducing because I know for many of you, if not all of you, you're very familiar with the Ostrom Workshop. So what I try to do just in the next 5 or 10 minutes is to showcase some of the initiatives that are going around their workshop community right now and ways you can get engaged. And then also hopefully just open up a dialogue to find maybe new ways that we can be useful and to really grab this next exciting chapter that's hopefully opening up starting tomorrow by the horns. So this is the current mission statement, such as it is of the workshop. As Edella mentioned, it's incredibly tough to encapsulate this robust, almost 50-year research agenda into any statement. So frankly, I would love to have your comments, thoughts on this. This was an exercise we went through during the last workshop affiliated faculty meeting. Not just a few months ago now, but we think it does a decent job of at least distilling down some of those core aspects of marrying theory and practice that Edella did such a great job of highlighting. And also to think about how we can rebuild trust, frankly, in our communities and our institutions at this really divisive time that we're all living through. In terms of what's going around the workshop, these days, and in some ways, as Edella said, the main goal, frankly, is just to carry the torch that Lynn and Vincent lit for us and also to apply that into some new exciting, domains and new common situations. So that's how you see the program structure really mirrored. The programs themselves at the workshop are relatively new. As Edella said, there were programmatic areas of study, but they weren't really distilled down with different, faculty leaders, program directors, really trying to take those on and build out an intellectual community around each of those different topics. So that's one thing we've been experimenting with just for the last few years since 2016. You can kind of think of these as a bit of an overlapping Venn diagram. So there's certainly and quite purposefully, overlap in terms of coverage, such as between the environmental and natural resource governance area, the commons area, political economy, et cetera. So we try to leverage those opportunities to work across programs and also, find ways in which, we can continue on this, as I said, multi-decade project. None of us, of course, can fill Lynn or Vincent's shoes, but now these days, between the 6 of us, we're hoping to at least make some progress, in that in that direction with a lot of help. So I'll just briefly introduce the programs as well as the new working groups that have been getting started just over the last year, as well as some of the other events and opportunities to hopefully get you more engaged in the workshop community once again. So those are just some of them you see listed at the bottom of the screen there. I see some familiar faces and some names I recognize. So you might remember this last fall, Edu Brandizio did a wonderful job of hosting our Governing the Commons 30 Years Later conference. Of course, we were hoping to do that in person with the unveiling of Lynn's statue that you see at the bottom of the screen, which is now placed in the newly renamed Ostrom Commons, very appropriately outside of Woodburn Hall on IU's campus. So I hope maybe by the end of this year, but certainly sooner rather than later, you'll have a chance to come visit and that we can do an actual, in-person event, maybe even before the next WOW is planned. And then, of course, I'll mention some of the other memorial lectures coming up and some of the other conferences that are in the works, most virtual, of course, for the time being. And just to be clear, the workshop will maintain just a 100% virtual presence until further notice, basically. So all of the events this spring, the colloquium series, the research series, the Tocqueville lecture program, et cetera, will be virtual. There is a chance that we might be able to go to more of a hybrid model starting in the fall, but of course, that depends on circumstances which are well beyond our control. So first off, the Governing the Commons program is the newest program. In some ways, frankly, it is at the heart of the workshop and arguably should have been the first program. But we're very, very fortunate to have it begun now with Bill Blomquist. And unfortunately, Bill is retiring this coming summer. So part of what I'll be talking about is how we're trying to, work with Bill and a cadre of others to think through the next steps of this Commons governance program, which I would love to hear your thoughts on as well. Bill has really spent most of the fall building up this community, deepening those ties with IESC and others. There's been a very active polycentricity working group. And after I'm done, I'll put up a few links in the chat box just in case you're interested in taking part if you're not already. Just the polycentricity group alone is now 50+ members, which is really exciting to see that taking off again. And Bill's been working on a lot of opportunities, both around IU's campus, such as with our Environmental Resilience Institute. You might have noticed Janet McCabe was just named Deputy EPA Administrator who heads up ERI for the incoming Biden administration, which we're all really excited about. And then looking ahead, we're trying to find a lot of new opportunities with Marco and now Inza to work with ISC in particular on building out the Governing the Commons program for this next chapter. But for now, Bill is the go-to person for the Commons. The Political Economy program, this is recently renamed and redeveloped as well. It was the Political, Economic, Legal Institutions and Organizations program, which was kind of the everything under the sun program. So we've tried to focus it more on just political economy questions. Gustavo Torrens from economics here at IU heads this up. He's interested in doing kind of a number of themes, including themes around populism, democratic resilience, ungoverned spaces, and is a definite interest of his that overlaps with the new environmental and natural resource governance program, which has been expanded. I know Gustavo would love to hear from you if you share interests in political economy and polycentricity as well. So please do reach out to Gustavo, and I'll put those email addresses at the end too. Data management, information governance, Angie Raymond heads this up. There's a brand new data salon series that just started, which is really exciting. Angie's doing a lot of work along with the rest of the research program affiliates on smart cities in particular. A lot of work on digital justice, alternative dispute resolution, online dispute resolution, AI governance. Frankly, it's a laundry list. So if you haven't checked out this program for a little while or similarly interested in Knowledge Commons, some of these related issues, Angie would love, I'm sure, to connect with you. Natural resource governance was the first program established at the workshop formally back in 2016 by our previous director, Lee Alston. We're right in the process now of a bit of a transition for this program. So our current director, Dean Luke, we haven't formally announced all this yet, but you can expect that quite soon, is stepping aside over this coming academic year. And Jess Steinberg, who is a professor at the Hamilton Lugar School here at IU, she's stepping in to expand the scope to include environmental issues, which, as Edella said, were really at the heart of a lot of these core research questions that Lynn in particular, and Vincent as well, were interested in. So you can see some of the initiatives that are on the docket coming up there. Jess in particular is really interested in starting a new Ideas and Encounters series and potentially a little research incubator to go along with that. Potentially over the summer, going along with an Ostrom boot camp. So I'd love to be in touch with any of you interested. You can expect more announcements as that starts to get crystallized too. And then finally, I've been trying to make some headway as well on cybersecurity and internet governance. This was a very dated picture, of course. This was back in January, almost a year ago now, when we had the Ostrom Memorial Lecture on Internet Governance with Bruce Schneier, who's done a lot of interesting work in this context, who came to campus to give that particular talk. Most recently, we're doing a lot of work on cyber peace and sustainable development and finding overlaps between those contexts. And in fact, just tomorrow, believe it or not, we're launching a new initiative on these cyber peace goals to basically think about the sustainable development goals, what really led up to their success, what were some of the challenges faced by all of the constituencies that led to that process, and how can we distill those down to questions about cybersecurity and internet governance. We're also doing a lot on the applied front to help local governments out across the Midwest. So the workshop is now home to the IU Cybersecurity Clinic as part of that. And we're doing a few reports for state governments as well, including the one you see at the bottom of the screen, which has been kind of interesting because this has been a domain that's frankly been starved for data for a long time. So it's been great to see some of that start to come in. So happy to connect you, or if you're interested in Internet of Things issues, critical infrastructure protection, sustainable development, internet governance, et cetera, and cyber peace, of course, please do reach out. And just finally, other ways to connect and to collaborate. Of course, I'm sure you're familiar with the Colloquia Research Series every Monday and Wednesday at noon virtually. We really hope you tune in. There's a fantastic lineup of speakers that we have planned. For the research series, we've been trying to experiment a little bit with that too. So we launched a new Ostrom book club with Janet Martinez and Lisa Amsler this past fall. That series is going to continue this spring. So if you have new books coming out about the Ostroms, please do let us know. We'd love to feature them in the Ostrom book club. Of course, the Visiting Scholars Program, the in-person program has been put on hold given the pandemic, but we're still continuing virtual visiting scholars and potentially expanding that to include practitioners and junior scholars, of course, as well with the Visiting Fellows Program. The podcast is new. So if you'd like to be featured on a governance roundtable of the Ostrom Workshop podcast, we'd love to do that. Including we're starting this new kind of audio notes from the field, kind of postcard series. So please do get in touch. We could feature you on an upcoming Grow podcast as well. I mentioned the incubator a little bit already. We're in the process now of launching a series of new MOUs, both across the US and with some international partners. So if you're at an institution, which either historically or you think would make sense, frankly, to have deeper ties with IU or the workshop, once again, please do reach out. We have a whole long-term strategy committee set up to help deal with those requests. And those are just some of the working groups that we have going now. So you can kind of think of that, just as Edella said, as more of an exercise in self-organization. The program directors, volunteer a lot of their time to help build out these communities, but a lot of these topics, are in line with those particular disciplinary bounds, of course. So the idea here for the working groups is to find, sometimes driven by visiting scholars or other interest topics, where there's a growth, where there's a community who's interested in taking this on. The working groups themselves, sometimes meet every couple of weeks. The polycentricity group meets roughly once a month at this point. And sometimes they're geared for a particular research project or grant, and other times not. So there's an opportunity there either to get involved with the existing groups or to suggest a new working group if you're interested. Of course, there's all of the resources and databases, including the Digital Library of the Commons itself, that we hope you know about and utilize. a number of long-term goals, and I would love to hear anybody's thoughts on these as well, because this is one thing we're thinking more about. What should be the next chapter of the workshop now that coming up in just 2 years, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of this amazing community. So what should the next 50 years look like? In other words, should it be something like a Belfer Center for the Midwest? Are there other ways to approach this? So those are some of the ideas we're thinking about now. And then very lastly, as one last note, we're trying to do more to re-engage not only at the collegiate level, but also to engage more, frankly, young kids on all of Lynn's fantastic work and her colleagues. This is one way to do that with this new children's book that we have in the works now with IU Press. If you can think of other ways to help do that and to ensure that the next generation is equally excited, about Lynn and Vincent's work, we'd love to hear about that as well. So apologies if I went a couple minutes long there, but thank you so much again for this opportunity, Ut, and I look forward to all the rest of the fantastic speakers.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly mention that this presentation or this event is being recorded, and we'll be posting links under the recording, and I'll also send an email with contact information so that everything is there if you choose to contact individuals. So our next speaker is Dr. Marco Janssen from Arizona State University. Please go ahead. Marco, you're muted. Marco, you're muted.
Yes, I said I know, but I had to find the mute club. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for giving me some time to present at the Center for Behavior, Institutions and the Environment, which is a sister center of the Ostrom Workshop, a small little sister in a way. So we are at Arizona State University, and you may see some we are now part of the College of Global Futures, which is a new college at ASU, which started during the pandemic. So we have not had any in-person activities in that sense, but ASU is known for very interdisciplinary work, and so that's one of the reasons I think that ASU have a kind of a sister center. And let me give you a little bit of background about the center. So it's this is kind of part of the goals. It started about 15 years ago when Lynn Ostrom got a part-time affiliation with ASU, and that enabled us to continue some of the work that Marty, Anderies, and myself were doing with Lynn. And we focus especially on social-ecological systems. In a way, you can see that our focus is a kind of a combination of the work on institutions and resilience. This is a kind of a nice picture of the two intellectual giants, which are kind of influencing a lot of the work. Bas Halling is on the right. So Marty and I met Lynn also as part of a resilience meeting. So that's how this started. So we have a particular focus of kind of the Ostrom work. So the mission is, in a way, we are a research center, so we focus on research on the robustness and governance of coupled infrastructure systems. We also like to provide the kind of workshop feeling. So we have normally a place with a lot of students visiting scholars and faculty. Of course, we are now not able to do that for a while, but we virtually also continue. And we also are interested to develop solutions, and I will show some of that for sustainability. ASU is also known that we want to, in a way, doing very applied work. Although a lot of our work is theory oriented, we also are interested in working on applied solutions. So we have a number of faculty participating from various schools, largely from sustainability and School of Human Evolution and Social Change. We have students involved from various programs. And it's not that we have kind of people on a payroll. We are providing we are a center where we have opportunities for people to meet. So here are some pictures of people, and they are really from artists to engineers. So we have a very diverse group of faculty and staff that we are working with, and of course students and visitors. So the research approach is like Edella mentioned, very multi-method. In recent years, we also start working more on art-science collaborations, which is a very kind of interesting angle to look at the kind of commons-related research in new ways. And I think Lynn would have liked to see some of that. So one thing that we do is we host the ISC Secretariat. We have a number of conferences coming up. We were planning to have an in-person conference in October. That's not gonna happen given the current situation. So we have a series of virtual conferences on different topics. The first one will be in about a month from now on commons in space, which is an area, research area, which might be new for this community, but there's a lot of interesting work going on, especially from people from also industry. And we also see an increasing use of the commons to other applications areas. So how do we fit with the institutional theory? We are interested in the conditions for success of self-governance. So, well, success is a kind of a difficult word. You have to be more precise, but depends on the application. How do socio-ecological systems cope with external disturbances? What are some of the behavioral foundations for self-governance? We are interested in applying games as intervention tools or learning tools. And we like to extend the commons institutions research beyond small-scale rural communities to more kind of urban settings. I will now provide some examples of research projects. So a lot of our work is kind of based on external funded projects. So some of the work that I think Marty will also relate to is when he talks about the SES library, is to look at comparative case study analysis, where we will look at what are using new methods to look at conditions of success for socio-ecological systems. And I guess Marty will discuss more of this, so I will not elaborate more on this, but this was also a starting point for a recent project that we went into the field to collect data on a large number of lake organizations instead of depending on secondary coding of studies of others. We did collect primary data of a large number of lake organizations in Vilas County. Luckily, we did that in 2019. And we are now writing this up. It's an interesting opportunity. It's kind of a natural experiment to have all these lakes with communities around them who are managing the lakes and have conflicts about different uses. So, so comparative analysis. We are involved with research on a more urban scale. This is some NSF funded research led by Halik and a colleague in the School of Sustainability, in which we look at water governance in Mexico City. We were involved by developing a model that is now used, this computer simulation model is now used by our colleagues at UNAM, working with the water authorities. We also developed a game that was used to communicate the model to people living in various neighborhoods. And we are now in the process of developing some more stylized models of urban governance based on this experience. A long-term project that started, well, actually Lynn was influential in getting the people together, and Ruth Meinzendick is leading, from IFPRI, is leading a lot of this work. And we will work for about 8 years to initially test whether playing games with communities in rural India lead to behavioral changes. We found that lead to new arrangements, and we are now have funding to scale this up and to see how we can use games as intervention tools. It had been on hold for a while, but in recent, I think in recent 2 months, they start going back to the field in India to continue the work. So we are interested to use games as a tool to stimulate self-governance. And so that's kind of a great, how do you bring self-governance in a more policy setting? Because how can we stimulate self-governance? So we are doing that with these games in India. This is an example of a science art project where we had 8 students living in the Mojave Desert with very little amount of water. They all survived. We didn't get arrested for, but we did have IRB approval for this. This was an art science project. We were there too as faculty, but check out the website too. We tweeted from the future. We thought that this was a dystopian future, but given current situations, this was a kind of a, well, and we were not too dystopian. We do a lot of experiments. That's the understanding more behavioral parts. We have a project focusing on communication. We also start having diverse collaboration with neuroscience, which are now also on hold. Experiments related to creation in a virtual Mars colony. And we got a recent NSF grant to use this to scale up commons dilemma experiments. So then finally, I want to mention we have an interest in open science, and we have diverse projects related to that. So ComSysNet is a long-term effort sponsored by NSF and the Sloan Foundation to make code of computational models available. And it's not a technology problem, it's very much a collective action problem. And so we are kind of have a lot of activities related to that for people in the modeling community. We are also working on the Open Modeling Foundation. Marty will talk about the SES library, and I also mentioned that we share the protocols, data, and software of our experiments, make it also available. We wrote a textbook for undergraduates based on kind of translating the work. We were teaching the work of Lynn, and she also came sometimes to class, but her original writings are difficult for undergraduate students, so we translated at a more kind of with more contemporary examples. And I was happy to show Lynn the kind of the final draft of the first version before she died. And we now had a few years ago, we had an update, and we have also some volunteers who made translations in different languages. So this is, if you don't know about it, I don't have the email address, but just Google Sustain in the comments and you will find a free ebook. So how to get involved? So use the Sustain in the Commons textbook, add your case to the SES library. Martin will tell probably how to do that. Share your code on ComSysNet. use the games, attend the conference. We have a number of conferences going up. So we will continue our annual March conference when things are allowed again. So we had that last year, and that was during the week the world flipped. So that was an interesting experience. And we have also each year winter school on nature-based modeling. And so these are some of the activities that you can get involved. Okay. I don't know how I did on time, but I hope I didn't go over it.
Did not. Thank you. Thank you. And our next speaker is Dr. Marty Anderies, also from Arizona State University.
Hello, everybody. Just doing a mic check. Can you hear me okay? Good. Thanks to Igri for inviting me to participate here. Thanks to all of you for coming, joining in. It's great to see so many familiar faces and friends out there. I'm going to share a bit more.
Marty, I think somebody pushed the wrong button. I think he's disappeared. Uh-oh.
And he may not notice it, so.
No, he might not. I will send him an email. In the meantime, maybe we should just go to the next speaker, and because of timing issues. Dr. de Moor, did you want to jump in?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Oh, wait,
jump
here
in.
he
No
is.
problem. Oh, okay.
Hang on one second. Here he is. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine.
The joy of Zoom conferences. There you are.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. No worries.
I'm going to share a bit more detail about what Marco was talking about. Let me here. Everybody see that okay? So this is the main landing page for CBIE. Marco just did a lot of interesting initiatives we have going on listed here and available. But I just wanted to point out a couple of things here. Of course, Marco mentioned Commons. You don't need a link. You just go to CBIE and look under the publications, of course, and like with most centers, we have lots of working papers. But the key thing here that I wanted to talk about really are many of the ongoing cyber infrastructure projects that we're trying to support across multiple methods, experiments, dynamic modeling, comparative case study analyses that Marco mentioned earlier. I'm going to talk specifically a little bit about the SES library. Many of you have heard me talk about it before, so I'm just going to introduce basic principles, but I just wanted to comment on some of these efforts and why I think they're so important. One of the things Marco mentioned on his slides that we're trying to move beyond studies of governance of small resource systems, which are great examples to start to develop theory and design principles for solving problems. But we know now that the kind of problems that we face are, in terms of governance, are multi-level systems at regional and supra-regional scales that require really leveraging the sort of extended ideas of the workshop, polycentricity, networks of adjacent action situations, coupled with Ostrom's SES framework and the CIS framework to try to understand what's going on there. A main principle of all these systems, the idea of governance, is really core. The core principle is information processing. How do we gather information about our environment and translate that into action or inaction in terms of conservation? Whatever the goal is, the key is maintaining these feedback structures. And so we moved beyond, Marco showed the picture of Buzz Halling and Lynn sitting together. That's when we met them, really, is when they came together in the late 90s to start linking political science, ecology, and economics through the Resilience Alliance with this idea of thinking about systems. Governance is an emergent feature within systems. You can characterize governance as rules, but I think a more lively and rich view, of course, is to think about governance as an emergent information processing feature in a coupled infrastructure systems. So that's what motivates the SES library. It's a library of Ostrom's original CPR cases, plus about 100 new cases now that move beyond that are linked spatially here, you can see in this map. And each case pulls together all of the Ostrom machinery as best we can. Case has an institutional analysis that's based on the IAD framework. So each case is described in terms of the IAD with extended language where we're structured. And each case has documentation where we were concerned about this underlying structure of these relationship between key entities. I think any could argue that this is just another box and arrow diagram. Sure, everything is in some sense. Ostrom's SES framework, which is just a slightly different orientation with slightly different arrows, conveys the same ideas. But really what I want to bring to your attention here, and I think what's most important, is the notion that this thing sets up two feedback structures. One on the right here, which we can call the political economy feedback structure with 623 and 632 links. And on the other side is what we might call practical management feedback structures, where you have public infrastructure, agricultural management agencies, fishery agencies, EPA, you name it, Royal Ministry of Agriculture, you name it, are monitoring the resource system and influencing resource user use with some sort of shared goal. Of course, those links can be 145, 541, 641, 146 in whichever direction, and they're simultaneously going. The key for governance fit is to harmonize those feedbacks on the left and the right through clever public infrastructure. And this becomes ever more important as we scale up and try to understand systems more broadly. This tool has been largely developed by graduate students at ASU, not the tool itself, but a lot of the data in that, through direct research assistantships where we originally translated Lynn's 86 CPR cases that Edella and Shuiyong Tong, Bill Bloomquist and others coded. They're all in here. And then Marco mentioned this deeper understanding of design principles and how they map onto different structures. The Cox et al. Cases from the 2016 extension developed by Jacopo Baggio here. So you see, I put in Jacopo's name here, and we've got this explaining success and failure of the commons case. And the way the SES library is set up is not a database. It's a library of connections. It's a place to network. It's a place to build a community of practice. There are documents, there are links to experiments, there are links to models, there are links to comparative studies like this one. This is the reference, and the paper is available here. But you'll see here, these are the related cases. So those are all the 60 records that were in the original case. I think Cox et al. Had 62 cases. Maybe Uta can remind me, she knows all the details about this. We have 60 of those cases in here. And each one, we're slowly starting to develop them. You can find out where the case is. There's a little summary and it tells you, hey, what's this case related to? So that you get this idea of a network of cases. I just want to comment here on something that Marco said. This is the original document that supports these cases, and this data was taken from. And I think this is a really interesting image, and I show it a lot because I think it's kind of a nice metaphor for the DNA of institutions. You know, you often see these color-coded bars of DNA sequences. Well, this is sort of a color-coded bar of an institutional DNA structure, where the DNA structure, the base codons, are not adenine, cytosine, guanine, and lysine. It's the design principles. So the codon for institutions at one level are the design principles. And then you can see here the difference between successful and unsuccessful institutional forms based on the co-occurrence of these codons. You know, do alleles go together, right? So to speak. And you can see that red is their co-occur and blue is they don't. That if you're not successful, you have some, you may have some presence of the design principles, but they don't travel in clusters. So the more we learn about genetic infrastructure, the more we learn about regulatory gene networks, networks of genes that come together in bundles that create the organisms versus, you know, the one allele for blue or brown eyes sort of idea. So this is a really nice metaphor for the kind of work that I think we're trying to support with the SES library. And that is, we need to build typologies of social ecological systems. And I'm agnostic as to what kind of typologies we build, but all societies often boil down to this separation between what you might call governance elites. If you look in history, that's, you know, it's how they come to describe it, and non-elites. And those the governance elites split into two groups mainly: the administrative aristocratic warrior elites, look across any culture, and the sort of the shaman, the priests, the meaning creating elites. So you've got elites that create meaning so that people can make sense of their lives, and you've got elites that create stability for economic progress. So that this represents that sort of structure, in the sense that you've got public infrastructure providers that are playing those roles. So combining cultural theory, institutional theory, political economy, ecological dynamics, and engineering sciences, we need to build typologies of coupled infrastructure systems and understand how they're going to be able to cope with change. If you're interested in committing cases, contributing, absolutely wonderful. Just pop me an email and I'll set you up an account. I'd love to engage as many people as I can working together with the SES library and the other cyber infrastructure that we're trying to support at the Center for Behavior, Institutions, and the Environment. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Marty. Thanks for that presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Tine de Moor.
Yes, thank you. You can hear me? Yeah. Okay, thank you for having me here, and especially thank you to Ute and Saba for organizing this great meeting with so many great people on a very timely moment, I dare say. It would have probably been also a good occasion to show that documentary with a very timely title being Actual World Possible Future, just the day before the inauguration in the US. But we think of you guys also in the US from Europe. Now, it's also a lesson in modesty workshop like this, not in the least because it reminds us of the great work done by Elinor Ostrom and Vincent Ostrom. And of course, a lot of it started with this particular book, Governing the Commons. But personally, I've always been especially intrigued by the subtitle of the book, The Evolution of Institutions for Collective Action. And I dare say that the subtitle has been sort of the lead through my own work as a historian and environmental scientist over the past, I guess, 25 years. And in the meanwhile, I've been able to build a great team of people with whom I work together at Rotterdam School of Management. We used to be at Utrecht University, but since 2020, we're in Rotterdam. Then we have a team that's linked to a chair called Social Enterprise and Institutions for Collective Action, whereby we try to connect in a very multidisciplinary way both scientific developments on institutions for collective action in various kinds. I'll explain a bit more about that later. With practitioners all over Europe primarily, but also outside of Europe. And we do so also for a very long time period. Our work dates from, well, discusses institutions for collective action from the year 1000 more or less until today in various sectors, and we study them in different methods. And we have an exciting new project that just started called Building a Unified Theory for the Development and Resilience of Institutions for Collective Action for Europe in the Past Millennium, UNICA. And I'm abusing this opportunity to draw your attention, in particular the potential postdocs among you, to this project, because we still have until the end of this month 2 job openings, one for a postdoc and a research officer. Until recently, we also had 2 PhD positions, but those have been closed. So I'm looking forward to hear from anyone who's interested in the topics we study, if they're interested in working with our team. Now I'm going to tell you a bit more about what we've been doing over the past years, and I'm just going to give you a bit of an insight on what we've been doing. Of course, not I won't be able to say a lot, but just some results to give you an idea. Now, as I said, we were working on the long-term evolution of institutions for collective action. So let's start with the last term. Institutions for collective action for us are, we define them as a collectivity of members that joins together to create, govern, use a set of resources, a collectivity of resources. Could be anything from intangible resources to a piece of land, but also knowledge and community building could be resources. And when you put a group of people together with a set of resources they have to use together, you're likely to get a social dilemma that needs to be solved. And that's when people start developing institutions for collective action. They start coming up with norms, rules, values. And those rules are, well, also what bind us together with people, for example, working at the workshop. It was also actually the drive that brought me for the first time to the workshop in Indiana. So these institutions for collective action, we've developed a bit of a model for that over the past years, whereby the overlaps between these three elements play an important role. I'm not going to say too much about it because it takes quite some time, but we put them together in order to understand what makes them resilient, what makes them go on for sometimes centuries. We have cases in our databases that actually went on for hundreds of years. And we want to know why that could be the case. Some of these cases are, for example, historical commons, pasture commons, but also collectivities of craftsmen across Europe and elsewhere. People who work together on the basis of occupation, also groups of women who sought security as a common good in the cities in early modern Europe, but also later on, for example, labor unions, we also consider them as institutions for collective action, various forms of cooperatives and agriculture, but also other domains, water boats in the Netherlands to keep the water out and keep the feet dry, but also forms of mutual insurances, which are actually going through a revival across the world right now as an alternative for commercials. Now we've been developing and we're writing about it, a new method called the Cicada Method, which stands for Strategies of Institutions for Collective Action and Development. Now, all of you who have been to Bloomington at some point in the past and may have encountered a period, I'm seeing Marco smile, whereby there were cicadas around. So you can consider our Cicada Method also a bit of a wink to the Bloomington workshop, whereby, the work of Ostrom is always somewhere around, and in this case, in cicadas. So yeah, let me tell you a bit more about it, how we actually apply this to our work and how we're going to apply it even more over the next few years. So as I said, we look at a very long-term development of institutions for collective action, and we're pretty serious about it, about 1,000 years. And throughout that period, we are focusing on various kinds of what we call archetypes of such institutions. I've shown you some pictures before of what these actually can look like. And what we see when we put these these various types of institutional collective action on a map, and when we see them growing over time, we see some periods of acceleration of this growth. And particularly in the late medieval period, when there's a time of population growth and commercialization, we see commons coming up all over Europe, but also guilds and other forms. We also see a period of acceleration between more or less 1880, 1920. And I'm now talking in particular about Europe. I'm not, you can't really say this for the rest of the world. At least we have not studied that. But we also see a period right now taking place, which has started, well, around 2005, more or less. The commons, when I was doing my PhD, starting in the late 90s, there were very few people who knew about it, but the past few years, it has actually become a bit buzzword in Europe. A lot of people are interested in commons. There's a really wave of institutions for collective action. And this is basically also what this broad timeline and our search and interest in these archetypes is also the bottom line of the UNICA project that just started. Now we're going to do several things in that project, which build on previous projects. Some of them are still running, and some have been, well, I've finished a few years ago. First, we focus on the macro level, whereby we try to figure out how what these archetypes really look like, trying to put more data together to give it more body. But then we also want to move to the meso level. And that's really interesting, I think, because now we try to understand what really leads to the growth of these different archetypes. How does it come that all of a sudden, the whole of Europe started, all Europeans across the European continent started building institutions for collective action in the late medieval period, for example. Now, what is interesting, if you look at these three waves I just described, is that there's various scaling strategies behind it. The first wave in the late medieval period, you see a tendency to stay very small as an organization, as an institution, and split and specialize if you became too large. This is completely the opposite in the second wave. The second wave is a period when you see, for example, mutual insurances, but also, for example, agricultural cooperatives emerging. In Europe, these developed in the very large Rabobank, and that's because they followed a merger strategy. They became very large and very, very hard to manage from the bottom up. And now they are often normal companies as far as they still exist. And today we see a sort of network strategy, and that's really intriguing because we believe that what we see today might be a true move towards polycentricity among these institutions. And it's really intriguing subject on which I hopefully the postdoc will be studying. There's other differences over time as well. For example, the lifespan of these institutions over time and their membership of individual members. But I think the scaling strategies are on the meso level by far more interesting. Now, we have already studied quite a bit of this on the basis of a database, which is actually a bit similar to what Elinor Ostrom had been developing, but which focuses on the long-term development of the rules of these institutions. And one particular database, which has been developed in great detail for the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands, focuses on these pasture commons since more or less the year 1300 and 1900. And I'll show you very briefly some results to give you an idea what we're actually doing in terms of methodology and in terms of, well, results. Just give you an idea of what is an early modern common actually did to provide us with all these great sources today, is they actually combine these rule books, very thick rule books, of which many have actually been preserved in the archives, and which help us to understand which rules were at place in these commons. And this is an example from the Netherlands, which survived for literally hundreds and hundreds of years. So a rather resilient example, I think I can say. Now, on the basis of these rules, these have been put into a database, analyzed, translated. We can say a number of things. One of them about the scaling strategies, or at least the spread. It's not really a strategy we see that, but we see, for example, that there's a sort of spread across, in this case, the Netherlands of pasture commons, Eastern Netherlands, whereby we don't see a sort of centralized model of dispersion. So it's what we don't know is why they actually emerged in these various places, but we do know that there was no central agenda behind it. So we do know that this is really a bottom-up movement that had various centers that developed it. I could say a lot more, but I'll stick to the basics now. And I'll move to the micro level to give you some idea where we can actually apply this Cicada method and where we can actually try to analyze it on the very local rule level. As you see here, we show two examples where there's a variety in the size of membership and the size of resources. And this has an effect. If you have a lot of members, you'll have to rethink the way you redistribute your resources. You share your resources, the appropriation. If you have a lot of resources, this might also have consequences on utility, equity, etc. Now, what we're trying to do is also to see when you develop the rules, these institutions to govern this, to make sure these institutions are resilient over time, what is common about these rules over time? How is this reflected in the type of rules you see? And for this, we use the database that we've been developing. And an interesting element that came out of the analysis we've been doing is that we see what we call a U-shaped dynamics in the development of institutions for collective action in this case, Europe over the past. So we've been looking at how the different types of rules changed over time. And what is interesting here is that you see a stronger activity in rulemaking in any domain at the beginning and the end of a commons lifespan, which is probably not surprising. But what we also do is that towards the end, there's a sort of bureaucratization happening. And when these commons died out, there was a lot of pressure of the government, but they tried to solve this with coming up with new administrative rules. And this is a trend we find basically all over Europe, which is, well, intriguing. We've been writing about it, and we probably will be doing more so. Another element we've been finding, which links directly to Lynn Ostrom's list of design principles, and which I also find intriguing to reflect on her work on the basis of the historical results we find, is that there's actually very little sanctioning being done in these commons, and there seems to be a negative correlation between sanctioning and the degree of sanctioning, so the intensity of sanctioning, basically the degree to which people use it as an instrument, and the longevity. So the longer a common lived in our databases, they go from 200 to 600 years, the less they actually invested in coming up with sanctions. That's one result. But another result is that we find very little graduated sanctioning in the way Lynn Ostrom described it, which made me reflect about the cases Lynn collected for her database. And one of the results may be, one of the other lenses we might be putting up when we're looking at a database is that maybe the cases in the database of Lynn Ostrom have already received a lot of stress. When we find graduated sanctioning in the past, it's often when they've tried anything else. When they've tried all the other options, then they move in graduate sanction, which makes sense because it's quite a severe and highly administrative thing to use. So you have to keep a record of all sanctions, etc. So maybe this explains why it was actually quite regularly found in the cases, or at least regularly enough to mention it as one of the design principles. Now, there's a lot of lessons we can learn, I think, from looking at the longitudinal development of institutions for collective action in the past. This is only for Europe, but I would love to add some more data and look at the other parts of the world to understand the long-term development. I'm looking at Ute for how many minutes I still have. 1, 2?
Half a minute.
Half a minute, okay. I'm going to directly into there's a lot of conclusions I could draw. I'll jump to some that, who maybe come up in a discussion later. So one of the results that we can connect to Ostrom's work is that the sanctioning is something we really have to pay attention to as an instrument that can, at least in the past, was used very sparsely, very only when it was really needed. And the same goes for graduated sanctions. So this really made me personally reflect on how to look at the design principle list. And maybe it also says something about the cases that were included in the work on which it's based. Now, just to finish off, I would like to draw your attention to a workshop we hope so much to have somewhere at the end of this year. We've scheduled this as late as possible. Somewhere in December, we're having a workshop that dwells on the work we've been doing with colleagues elsewhere in Europe, the MIDI project. And we intend to have a small workshop also for COVID reasons, but fully funded for all the participants who are willing to think with us about a combination of a similar type of data collections like the one we have built, but in combination with innovative methods to analyze the dynamics of the ICAs over time. And of course, we'll also spend some time, or try to work with these databases on site during the workshop. We'll be issuing a call for papers later on this year before the summer, and we really hope that we can make people enthusiastic to bring you to the Netherlands, hopefully, and meet in person. How great would that be? And lastly, if you're interested in learning more what we're doing from Rotterdam, there's a lot of resources online. We're revamping this website, but as long as that has not been the case, we leave these resources online. Some of them are a bit outdated, but still, I think, quite valuable. And we also have a group of affiliated researchers, which is a very nice group to strengthen collaboration with what we're trying to do in Rotterdam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. De Moor. Just to clarify, the workshop is in 2021, right? Because the slide said
December
2020.
2021. Yeah,
Okay.
well, that's the plan.
Okay, great. All right, our final speaker is Dr. Saba Siddiqui. She's also the director of Igri, so let's give her a hand.
Hi, everybody. Can you see the slides okay? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much to everybody for taking the time to attend this event today. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share a bit about the Institutional Grammar Research Initiative, or Igri as we call it. And today I'll be talking about the mission of the Igri, the research program that's currently motivating it, and how our group feels the work of the Igri is contributing to institutional theory and analysis. So in terms of the mission, really the mission of the Igri is to convene scholars from around the world, from various disciplinary backgrounds who are interested in the study and practice of institutional analysis. We are focused on theoretical and methodological advancement of a particular approach for conducting institutional analysis called the institutional grammar, which was proposed by Sue Crawford and Elinor Ostrom in an article published in 1995 in the American Political Science Review. And essentially, what Crawford and Ostrom presented with the grammar of institutions was a systematic way for capturing the language of institutions, leveraging an institutional syntax. And there are a couple of underlying assumptions that motivate this approach, or that underlie this approach. One of those motivations is that institutions are often conveyed in language, and that can be written language. So for example, when institutions are conveyed in documents like public policies, or institutions can be conveyed in spoken language, as when social norms as institutions are conveyed by members of a community. Another related assumption that undergirds this approach is that institutions in their linguistic form contain common types of information, common types of features. And therefore, when we think about analyzing institutional language, we can look for these common features, these generalizable, abstractable features. And so fundamentally, we think about language and these linguistic features of institutions in terms of their composition or their constituent parts. And so fundamentally, I'll just give a very brief high-level overview of what the institutional grammar suggests, is that any given institution, like a public policy or an orally conveyed social norm, can be disaggregated into a number of institutional statements or particular linguistic constraints that describe to actors within a particularly institutionally governed domain or social system what they can, they cannot, they may do, what they must do within particular constraints. Or these institutional statements can sometimes also constitute features of the social system, or parameterize institutional, features of these institutional systems. And these institutional statements with the institutional, under the institutional grammar, are what are decomposed into more specific linguistic features to basically get an understanding of what they are and what they say and what they mean. So just as illustration, I won't go into detail here, but say we have a statement that's regulating behavior within a particular policy domain that suggests that inspectors must visit facilities annually for the purpose of, I don't know, monitoring and enforcement. On the left-hand side here, you see the words or phrases that comprise this institutional statement. And on the right, you see the syntactic components or syntactic labels that are assigned to these different pieces of language or these different words. As another example, just to give you a sense of what a statement that constitutes or parameterizes features of systems looks like, upon enactment of a policy, facility shall be defined as a certified operation. So it's defining what this social entity means, those facilities. And here again, you see on the left, the language disaggregated, and then you see the syntactic labels assigned to them. So again, just as a high-level overview, institutions, to facilitate their understanding, can be divided into institutional statements, which can be further parsed along these abstractable features. And because we're talking about institutions as represented through language, those syntactic features accord, just like in an English grammar or another kind of grammar of language, with syntactic components. But you may be asking yourself, well, this is a lot of fine-grained, specification, classification of institutional language. What do we get from this kind of syntactic decomposition? What is the analytical leverage? Well, for starters, it just to circle back to this primary assumption and motivation of the grammar, it allows us to think about what institutions are made of, what are the generalized composite, abstractable features of institutional statements. And Marty earlier made the reference to genetics. Here again, there's a reference to genetics, but maybe at a more micro level that we're thinking. Crawford and Ostrom, in talking about the grammar, presented the idea that understanding the syntactic components of which institutional statements are made of is akin to identifying kind of the genetic code of institutions. And through understanding that those composite features of institutions, we can gain then a more comprehensive representation of institutional structure and meaning, which then supports the systematic investigation of the link between institutional design and behavior. Fundamentally, what underlies that sort of assumption is that we can think, what aspects of institutional design is most influential in shaping behavior or compels behavior in a particular way. And it gives us a fine-grained basis upon which to do this. So how is the Igri contributing to the development of the grammar? Well, through three different ways currently. So the Igri research program is built on these three efforts. One of those efforts revolves around computational text analysis, where fundamentally what we're trying to do is develop as well as apply computational text analysis and supervised machine learning approaches for coding and analyzing institutions. Fundamentally, our primary activity right now is the development of software that will enable the automated coding of institutions, taking the form of public policies. And we're leveraging a couple of other sort of related developments in science as part of this. One is the development of natural language processing tools. The other more practical development is the availability of institutional documents, in this case, public policy documents in digitized form that allows us to engage these computational approaches. Another another effort within the research agenda that we're focusing on is what we call evaluating institutional performance. And here, what we're trying to do is think through how can the syntactic components and syntactic representations of institutional statements be leveraged toward the operationalization of kind of institutional concepts that we care about. Can we think about those composite elements of institutional design as indicative of certain concepts or indicative of certain qualities of institutions? And then we're also, a third piece of the research program currently is using the IG to study real and simulated behavior. So building on this idea that the Ostrom research program is very mixed method, we're engaging the IG within a variety of methods to think about the link between IG and behavior, or institutional design and behavior, excuse me. So in this work, we're looking at application of the grammar to study the interaction between formal and informal institutions, or rules in form and rules in use, for those of you who are familiar with the IAD sort of lingo. And we're also using the IG in conjunction with game theoretic approaches and agent-based modeling to facilitate institutional modeling. How do we think as a community this contributes to institutional theory and analysis? In a few ways. One is sort of thinking about facilitating the development of institutional theory by offering means for improved institutional measurement. So our the position in some cases, not as I shouldn't speak monolithically as a community, we have various opinions on this, but generally there's an intuition here that by clarifying institutional units of analysis through leveraging this idea of institutional statements, you know, we're lending some clarity in terms of what do we mean when we say institution, and how can we sort of evaluate the institutions based on common institutional units of analysis to generate you know, more widely applicable theoretical understanding. We see opportunities for utilizing you know, those syntactic components to understand how institutions and institutional statements configure, recognizing the importance of institutional configurations in governance. We think this approach can offer opportunities for understanding institutional change. As Tina pointed out, this notion of evolution of institutions is really central to some of the work in this area. And we can look at how institutions change by looking at how those individual linguistic features of institutions are changing over time as a basis to study this. And then, you know, we're hope that through sort of understanding of how the crafting and the design of institutional language links to behavior, we can also offer some practical guidance on institutional design. Listed here are our current Igri personnel. We're a growing community, and we welcome any of you who are interested in joining us in this work to please reach out. You know, you've been introduced to Uta as our lab manager. We're so grateful for everything she does. We've got a number of affiliates, and we're very blessed to have a set of really fantastic interns that have advanced our work in important ways. The Igri hosts a variety of events and activities. One of those is a research seminar. We host monthly seminar. Many of you have attended before, in which we basically invite scholars that are working with the institutional grammar or think they could be, and want to explore possibilities there. And these fundamentally here, this is all toward better examining, or understanding antecedent structure and implications of institutional design, these presentations that are featured there. Igri also hosts a text analytics lab, and our lab is basically an entity through which we do a few different things. We're a virtual lab and a virtual initiative, so this offers us a platform to accommodate students, postdocs, faculty from institutions, from anywhere in the world, offer these individuals an opportunity to engage in research projects that align with any of our research foci of the initiative. Through this lab, we also provide opportunities for students and postdocs with the opportunity to engage in research and development and or testing of software being developed by Igri for automated classification of institutional text. And our lab also hosts training in computational and manual text analysis, aligning with the IG focus. And we also host trainings on the institutional grammar more generally. So if you're interested in attending any of those events, please visit the lab website. There are various ways to get involved with the Igri. So please consider attending our research seminar. Again, you know, if you'd like to be involved in research projects, we'd love to involve you in the work of the lab. Consider joining our listserv. I'll also highlight just a couple of other things that you'll find on our website, institutionalgrammar.org. One is information about upcoming meetings, which are like multi-day workshops and conferences that we offer on the institutional grammar. But we also have a resources page. And on that resources page, you'll find institutional coding guides, some comprehensive guides on kind of operationally applying the institutional grammar. We have a series of instructional videos on using the institutional grammar and just describing conceptually what the institutional grammar is. If you click on that link, you'll get directed to our institutional grammar YouTube channel, where we have playlists, our research seminars posted, including this one we posted there. Coming soon, we'll be posting data sets for reference, and then you'll also find there a list of publications, IG publications, in case you want to learn more about what the institutional grammar is and how it's being used empirically. So that's all. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you to all our speakers, and I'm going to have Edella wrap up, but before we wrap up, there was one audience question posted in the chat by Bethany Willis. Bethany, did you want to ask Dr. Anderies yourself?
I can do, if you can hear me with these on.
Perfect.
I have to have them on because my boyfriend's playing video games in the background. I don't want that to come in. It was just a question to ask whether the SES library accepted or contained any PhD theses. I did my PhD and I used the Iad Framework as a tool to aid in data interpretation, and I focused on local scale marine governance in the UK. But I have the thesis as an output before journal articles, so I was just wondering whether it had space for that. Thank you.
Marty, we can't hear you.
How about now? Is that better? Yes, thanks for the question. Indeed, as Edella will tell you, and many of the students that I've worked with over the years will also tell you, is that there are many PhD theses that actually constitute the basis for many of the CPR cases. And they are very welcome and appreciated. So by all means, just pop me an email and I'll set you up an account so you can contribute that.
Excellent, thank you.
And again, we'll post links and contact information with the video, and I'll also send around an email. Edella, did you want to take over? And then there's also a chat message from Dr. Newpain, Laxman Newpain. Did you want to address the group directly instead of me being your voice? No?
Oh, Laxman, you're muted. Sorry.
You're still muted. Sorry.
Hello? Hello?
Perfect, we can hear you now.
Okay. Okay, I did, I did my research, Ostroms. I combined two, interfaces, Ostroms, Social-Ecological Systems, and Amartya Sen's capability approach. I think this is directly go to the Tine's work in Rotterdam, most of the works I'm doing, but resource systems in my forestry, community forest research area in Nepal, that's a resource system is a part of the, area part of the resource unit. There is a lot of grammars like Siddiki perfectly mentioned about this. This is a part of another feedbacks come for resource system to governance systems. There are so much formal and informal set of conditions for the use and share the resources like the forestry resources. And another actors who is being, you know, part of the sharing the resources actors. There are passive and passive or active actors. Those are the, you know, users, forestry user groups, and they provide the feedback, resource audit, and others, you know, resource systems. And similarly, language, you know, grammar, language, interactions, harvestings, methods, management practice. There's have been collectives, methods of the resource system, and outcomes. These derive the outcomes, improving livelihoods, efficient social and economical infrastructure. But what I am to tell, this research is overall contributing sustainability of social ecological systems, and simultaneously contributing capability approach. These two, you know, interfaces from the two scholars, 21st century scholars, has been perfectly contributing sustainability or sustainable biological resources as well as common pools. These are the short, you know, short overview of my researches. I'll be sharing to these, you know, speakers as well as other communities. Thank you, Ita, give me this opportunity.
You're very welcome. Edella? Do you want to close the session?
I think we can take one more question, huh? From, I'm going to try pronouncing your name, Yuni Pabola.
Yeah, that's me, Joni. I just wanted to briefly complement what Tine was saying earlier on about, you know, commons research in Europe. Lynn spent quite a lot of time in Europe with the institutionalists in the ecological economics community. And she kind of inspired us to do work, for example, on polycentricity. And there are two specific contexts in which that work is highly relevant in the present day. One is where the state has retreated from its policy responsibilities, for example, in the Eastern Europe, where land was re-privatized, and then you are left with a vacuum of kind of governance where kind of very small plots of privately owned land doesn't anymore serve an economic function, and then non-state voluntary arrangements are emerging to kind of facilitate the allocation of land, for example, conservation purposes. The other example is areas where the state is not acting quickly enough or is reluctant to act, and then bottom-up actors are stepping in to perform the roles of the state. And this could be, for example, the provision of nature-based solutions for ecosystem services, or, for example, the UK flood protection, where the state is not doing enough. What is oftentimes an object of analysis in this work is hybrid institutions. So they are not your entirely kind of bottom-up collective action-based solutions. You have an amalgam of state-based formal institutions, which are then complemented by voluntary arrangements. The other example where this is relevant is cross-boundary collaboration, where you might have institutional structures and scales that are not matching, and the kind of focal, you know, emphasis in institutions is different. And then, you know, the collaboration is oftentimes achieved by complementing the formal institutions by using, you know, informal network-based collaboration that is kind of bridging the incompatibilities between formal institutions. The other sort of development, which is quite recent, is that the you know, polycentric governance sort of metaphor is coupled with discursive institutionalism, which is sort of bringing the focus on the role of ideas alongside power, resources, and rules of the game in affecting outcomes. And this is being done in policy areas like recent community energy development, which is supposed to be contributing to decarbonization in modern societies in Western Europe, for example. and in ecosystem service provision in kind of local settings, sort of, for example, communities seeking to protect themselves from flood risk instead of waiting for the state to do that on their behalf. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that, because I felt that you know, many of the examples that you were given were more along the traditional lines of commons research, whilst I see quite a lot happening in the kind of emerging policy areas, which are very sort of recent. Thank you.
Thank you. You raise a number of interesting issues, as did all of our speakers. So I'm just going to take one moment just to sort of put an end note to this really interesting gathering. And I think that the Ostroms would be both impressed and engaged with what was presented today. And I think the presentations also give us a lot of hope that the research programs first developed by Lynn and Vincent and centered at the Ostrom Workshop, how they have spread across globally to a variety of different settings. And you can see the richness and the real liveliness of these different research programs that continue to press away on the questions that have long been of central concern to members of the Ostrom Workshop. And so to see the Ostrom Workshop under Scott's guidance and how vibrant it is and how it's extended its reach into a variety of different research programs, to listen to Marco and Marty about the different compelling methods that multi-methods that continue to be used to explore self-governance, to have Tine describe, I'm curious about building a unified theory and what a unified theory would mean, but that's probably for another day. The institutional collective action and how institutions evolve over time. All of these are rich areas. And so we hope that you contact any of us to continue to be a part of this vibrant research community. And also, I think we have to have a discussion on what is meant by the state, which would then bring Vincent back into this discussion, because we've largely been talking about Lynn here, but Vincent is an important dimension to our understanding of institutional arrangements. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Edella, and thank you so much, everybody, for your interest in the presentations and our event. And please feel free to contact us with any questions you have. If you want to join any of the communities, as I've mentioned, we'll be posting the video and with links, and I'll also send a concluding email with contact information to everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.